First of all, you're due a few words explaining the mix of lessons this morning. The marking of not one, but 2 Sundays at the top of your bulletin. There we read it is the 16th Sunday after Pentecost, and it is the feast of St. Michael and all angels. How can it be both? September 29th in our calendar is the date of the feast of St. Michael and all angels. It seldom falls on Sunday, and very little in our church, as it says in the prayer book, takes precedence of a Sunday, which means the resurrection remains the big deal in our lives, and we follow the Sunday lessons every Sunday. However, with a small number of really major feasts, we can at least, and I chose to do that, read some lessons from this major feast of the church. The 2 first lessons are what you might call fanciful or wild or unrealistic or hard to imagine. But they do then call on our imagination to see the scenes, to imagine what the writer is telling us about our sacred story. Jacob, on the lam from his brother, finally has to rest. He can't run day and night. He lays down on the ground, a rock for a pillow. Comes his dream. Why would a fugitive who has just tricked his brother out of his inheritance have a dream of angels, those close to God, serving God, and messengers to humans? Why are they not harassing him, not hounding him as his family might, but moving up and down on ladders and seemingly allowing the Lord to appear next to Jacob? The Lord makes a covenant with Jacob similar to the astounding one he made to his father, and vows that the Lord will be with Jacob no matter what, and will bring him and his many descendants back to this very place, which will be his. Upon awakening, what would you do upon awakening after a dream like that? Upon awakening, Jacob gives thanks, calls the place holy, and sanctifies it as none other than the gate of heaven and the house of God. He's amazed, and we may be too, to think that the division, if there is one, between heaven and earth, between the sacred and the secular, has been broken through. No such transitions in the second lesson. We're taken directly to heaven. Now this is heaven before the death and resurrection of Jesus, because Jesus is telling this story. It's filled with angels, yes, because God is near, but war breaks out in heaven as well as earth. And following a mighty fight by the archangel Michael, Satan and his angels plotting against God are thrown from heaven to earth. Oh, I'm all out of order. They come down to earth and give a reason for the difficulties being faced on earth by the writer of Revelations. Among other things, at the time that this was written, at the end of the 1st century, there were what one professor of mine in the seminary called a lot of closet Christians in the Near East. Because there were Jews, as the writer of the book is, Jews who were convicted by the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus and thought, surely he must be the Messiah. But they dare not say that, right? In temple. This was long before there was anything that anyone would call a Christian church. There were followers of the way, but Rome was still in control. And so coded communication between these people was very important in passing on the story, important and warning about the world they were living in, evil abounded for them, and the story of St. Michael and all angels made sense of it, with Satan and his forces now on earth. We 21st century readers, when we come across a passage like that, and take my word for it, this is a tame passage from the Revelation according to John. There are all kinds of beasts with horns and heads and in different colors, just on the warpath against the Messiah, among other things. We need to use our imaginations as well as our critical faculties when we read these materials. If we can imagine ourselves in these scenes and can put ourselves in John's shoes a little bit, then we can begin to hear his message. But rather than saying, oh, poppycock, it's silly, hey, we've been given the gift of imagination as well as the gift of intellect and the gift of other passions in this life. And these two lessons, paired with our gospel of the Sunday after Pentecost, got me thinking a little more broadly about biblical reading in general. We may be open to using our imagination when dealing with the first two lessons, but then withhold it when we hit more mundane passages, more down to earth, we say. Well, Jesus was certainly down to earth, wasn't he? He was. God incarnate, God living as we do, in the thick of love, disappointment, joy, and confusion, which are the stuff of what our lives are made of. I believe this is an unhelpful dichotomy then. Accept the place of imagination in fancifully confusing passages, but consider imagination unnecessary and turn solely to our more intellectual and critical faculties when we're looking at readings like this morning's gospel. All of Scripture, whether it's written 10,000 or 2,000 years ago, deserves our imaginative as well as intellectual gifts in our reading. And we do, as a community, as well as individually, want to understand, want to be able to interpret a passage for our time and our place. What is the message that a prophecy, a letter, a gospel have for us? Have for us about how Jesus calls us to live, calls the church to live. Then, too, we have to remember that we do not interpret these readings in order to wrestle with them, in order to tie them down, flatten them out, and put kind of spears in each corner so it won't move, and it will continue to mean the very same thing to us all the time. That's not what interpretation is. Our ability to wonder at what we've seen and what we've read is lost when we do that. Our spirituality is ever evolving. Our hearing this gospel now is different from having heard it 3 years ago in Sunday cycles. First of all, remember that Jesus is telling this story to a group of Pharisees. Now, Pharisees were known in their time for their piety and their knowing all the rules of religion. They were also known for their love of money. They paid attention to the collections. They did. And they thought it was their responsibility to keep this formal thing going. As a person of means and who values money, when he hears there was a rich man, the Pharisee might say, yeah, and he never did anything bad to the man at the gate. Well, that's true. But for many of us, when we hear there was a rich man, whatever else you might add, like or unlike the Pharisees, you tend to say, oh yeah, that one. I remember that one. I know that story. And then you turn your ear flaps down and it's the end of things. There was a gap between these two in this story, wasn't there? One was in the fine house, eating well. One was at the gate to the house. A gulf between them. The person who had the power to change that gulf never moved. Never changed that gulf. The poor man doesn't do anything at the gate either but sit there and hope for a scrap. When he dies, he's carried to heaven by angels to reside literally near the bosom of Abraham. It's as if in life they lived on different planets, didn't they? And Jesus says in the afterlife they lived on different planets too. The rich man finds himself in Hades, in torment. Evidently, eternal torment. He calls out to Abraham that this poor man, whom he now recognizes, might just come and drop some water on his tongue to relieve his suffering. And he's refused, and he's told by Abraham, there's a gap between the two forever. So that even the rich man who loves his brothers cannot even send a warning to them about the outcome of their similar, evidently, ways of living. What a reversal. Isn't that a reversal? How do you think the Pharisees heard this story? We, in hearing it, hear the zinger at the end, don't we? When Jesus says, not even one who comes back from the dead will be able to convince them, as he knows he will do. We often hear Jesus turns the tables on the established order he finds. He literally overturns the tables of those making a profit at the temple. Blessed are the poor, he says to thousands of people, and the last shall be first. We've heard all these, but what is our role in seeing this reversal in our own time? How do you hear this parable? Our world is full of images, that in this life come close to the ones we hear in the parable. We have gated communities. We have the means of feeding ourselves well every day and not going hungry. As a church community, we even commit some of our money to assist in areas of need here and abroad. But the parable goes deeper, I believe, and in a slightly different direction. Have you ever, the rich man never even saw. That's what sticks in my heart. The rich man never even saw the man at the gate. When he went to his window, he saw his courtyard, he saw friends who might be visiting him, he saw the business in the city, but he never saw the poor man at his gate. God always saw both the men, would love and embrace both the men. God's world is not complete until all God's critters are counted. All. That's the love of God that is so difficult to comprehend, as we say. So amazing. The rich man never even saw the poor man. Have you ever had that experience of not being seen? Illness can do that. cut you off from the life-giving exchanges of everyday life, which when you're well seems so ordinary. But when you're at home or in the hospital, ill, they're not there. You're isolated by your illness as though you have no place in the order of ongoing human activity. Then when you recover and return comes the greeting. It's so good to see you. The heartfelt answer you can give is, it's so good to be seen. Indeed, it is, isn't it? Luke paints for us a picture of that inclusion. And it is an inclusion that God practices all the time. It is the nature of God's love for the world. Can we begin in our living by truly seeing one another? And then remember, all is not complete until we use that talent of seeing beyond the boundaries of comfort that are so easily created, including only those who live like us, only those who look like us, only those who agree with us. Whatever materials go into the construction of your gate. For me, that's the calling of the parable. What about you? Wrestle with it. That's what parables are for. Wrestle with it. Mind, heart, imaginatively, and soul. My reading might come to you. There are many others that fit with the parable, that fit with the images of the time. You may find out a different truth for yourself. Consider this one, but then read it. And after the words come, there was a rich man